Officer asked woman to open coffin and trunk. He never expected what happened next. This officer was walking his daily route when he came across something that would cause his day to take a sudden turn. During an inspection, he saw that a woman had a coffin in her trunk, and when he asked her to open it, something he would have never imagined happened. Ben was an officer and was walking his daily route around the block. He was enjoying his walk as it was a warm and sunny day. It had also been a nice, quiet, and uneventful route, but that would all change when he turned the last corner and saw something peculiar. A parked van captured his attention. It was parked on the grass between some bushes and trees. If the owner had tried to hide the van among the foliage, his plan wasn't successful because the van stood out even more. Ben looked around for some sign of activity, but no one was around. This situation had caught his interest. Typically, a parked van in this part of town would indicate some sort of criminal activity. But from the moment he saw the van, there hadn't been any sign of movement. Ben decided to look closer, not knowing his day would take a surprising turn. He crossed the street and made his way across the field. He approached the van from the side, so he changed direction. This way, he could see if someone was inside before that person could see him. Moments later, his plan bore fruit as he noticed someone in the driver's seat. Since the moment he had seen the van parked, he hadn't seen anyone near it or any type of movement. But now it appeared someone had been sitting in it from the start. The person had to be waiting, but for what? Ben had to act now before the driver's associates would arrive. With that thought in mind, he quickly closed the gap between him and the van. He noticed how the driver was alerted by his movement and looked his way. Ben was surprised to find out the driver was a woman, who was heavily startled by his sudden appearance. What an interesting situation he found himself in. Everything about the situation seemed suspicious. A van was parked in the middle of a field with the driver sitting in it, who was a very skittish woman. Ben asked her to roll down the window and hand over her registration. He couldn't help but notice her hands shake when she handed over the documents. To his surprise, the paperwork checked out. What was going on? He thought the situation over in his head. The best way to deal with this was just to give her a warning and send her on her way. But the woman ignored him and didn't move a muscle, raising his suspicion. Why is this woman acting so strange? At first, she cooperated, but now she didn't want to go away. He leaned forward to get a better look, trying to find answers inside the van. Then suddenly, his eyes grew wide with surprise. There was something seriously wrong going on here. His eyes rested on something that lay in the back of the van. Was he seeing it right? Or did his eyes deceive him? Ben's head was pushed against the window. There was no mistaking it. It was a coffin. This situation had taken a turn he had never expected, but there was more. With his eyes still wide open from surprise, he leaned forward, his head inside the van, to take a better look. The woman didn't react and sheepishly stared through the front window like he wasn't there. Ben noticed sweat on her forehead and her hands clamping the wheel. That's when he peeked towards the back. A large object was present in the back of the car, and it was clear that the woman did not want to acknowledge it. This woman was hiding something, and Ben's patience was over. He opened the driver's door and demanded her to come out of the vehicle and follow him to the back. The woman stared at him with wide-open eyes while slowly exiting the van. He gestured for her to walk towards the back and noticed her frantically looking around. This made Ben check their surroundings, worried about unpleasant guests joining them. After ensuring nobody was around, he asked her to open the coffin. When Ben spoke to her, she stopped looking around and glared at him without responding. She kept fidgeting with her hands, and it looked like she was thinking about what to do. What was she hiding that would cause her to act so strange? Her uncooperativeness left him no choice. Without hesitation, he swung open the back doors of the van. He had wasted enough time trying to get the woman to answer his questions. The coffin filled almost the entire van. It looked sturdy and had some type of blue coating on it. Ben probed around to try and open it and felt something. His hands met a long and cold metal rod, and he grabbed it. It was a crowbar, which he could use to open the coffin. He quickly opened it but was shocked when he looked inside. The casket was completely empty. He wanted to berate the woman with questions, but couldn't. He was speechless. Ben looked at the woman with a puzzled look, but to his surprise, she wasn't interested in the coffin and was looking around again. Contemplating what to do, he stepped inside the van to take a closer look. The van's suspension groaned as he stepped inside, but he couldn't have expected what would happen next. He was examining the coffin when the van suddenly shook, and the suspension groaned again. The woman had also entered. Was she finally ready to cooperate? Before he could ask her a question, he heard something. The woman was softly sobbing, and it didn't take long for her to fully burst into tears. Even though Ben had been a cop for a long time and had been in all sorts of situations, he couldn't hide his surprise. What was going on? Why was this woman suddenly crying? Did she think he found something that would send her to jail? What was she hiding? This sudden outburst made the woman even more suspicious, as she had been acting strange since he arrived. He had been strict and direct with her for some time, but felt it was time to be more demanding. It was time for answers, but he couldn't have predicted what those answers would be. For the first time, Ben heard the woman talk. He heard a tremble in her voice as she started to speak. "I don't want to do this." Ben had to focus on hearing what she was saying, but it blew him away when he realized what she was saying. "This is serious." The woman had just claimed she didn't want to be here and was pressured into it. "What do you mean? Are you pressured into doing this?" The alarm was noticeable in his voice. He tried to remember her name so he could comfort her. She was finally talking, so this was his opportunity to get answers. Stephanie had been extremely nervous and worried ever since the police officer had arrived. She hadn't signed up for this. What was she going to do? Eventually, she couldn't hold it in anymore and burst into tears. She had to come clean. "They threatened me and my daughter. I had to do this." She noticed the stunned look on the officer's face. He hadn't expected her to say anything like that, so she started to tell her story. Yesterday, Stephanie bumped into dangerous-looking people who knew a lot about her and her daughter. If she didn't do what they told her, something terrible would happen to them. When she entered her van this morning, she found a note with instructions, and when she looked in the back, she saw the coffin. The message told her to be in this location to pick something up, and with the note came a warning, a picture of Stephanie dropping off her daughter at daycare. Did the officer realize she didn't have a choice? Did he believe her? Stephanie was frightened out of her mind and tried her best to talk as clearly and calmly as possible, but wasn't sure she was. Then, a sudden realization kicked in. What if the dangerous-looking man saw her talking to the officer? She left the coffin area without saying anything and ran toward the driver's seat. The officer could not let her go and ran after her. "What are you doing?" he asked. Stephanie was holding back tears and started yelling. "What if they saw us talking? My daughter isn't safe. You have to help me, please." Ben looked at the desperate woman behind the wheel and instinctively knew she had been telling the truth. While making his way to the passenger's side, he scanned the surroundings for any movement or indication of other people and saw nothing. Was she worried for nothing, or were they already too late? They drove to the daycare as fast as they could. Stephanie was determined to get her daughter to safety, and Ben was determined to get to the bottom of this. Stephanie was so panicked she forgot she had a police officer in her van multiple times, and he had to warn her not to break traffic rules. When they entered the daycare, Stephanie started screaming her daughter's name. "Lizzie! Where are you?" There was no response, and an ominous feeling grew inside Ben's body. Then suddenly, a blonde girl shot toward her. Stephanie fell to her knees and embraced her daughter. She was relieved, but Ben told her they weren't safe yet. He was glad they found her daughter, but it didn't mean they were out of the woods yet. Now that Stephanie wasn't at the pickup point anymore, the criminals were undoubtedly looking for her and her daughter. He had to find out who they were and arrest them to ensure Stephanie and her daughter's safety. To achieve this, he asked them to join him at the station. Stephanie could press charges there, and Ben would be sure they were safe. He noticed that she hesitated, so Ben told her he had put his faith in her, so now it was her turn to put faith in him. On their way to the station, Ben noticed how, slowly but surely, all the stress and panic left Stephanie's body. Now that she had her daughter with her and someone who helped her, she seemed at peace. But that peace would soon be disturbed after she got a call from an unknown number. While entering the police station, she answered the call. Her face immediately went dark, and she alarmed Ben. He saw the fear on her face and instantly knew what was happening, so he gestured for her to follow him into an empty room. "How did they get my number?" Stephanie whispered. Ben quickly closed the door, took the phone from Stephanie, and put it on speaker. "I saw you with that police officer. That was a mistake. We know where to find you," a distorted voice said. It looked as if all of Stephanie's hope had faded, but Ben kept his hopes up. "Leave me alone," Stephanie suddenly screamed as she tried to take back her phone. Ben managed to keep her from ending the call as he had just thought of something. He tried to calm Stephanie down without making a sound, as he didn't want to alert the criminals on the phone he was there. Ben had just realized this phone call could help them catch these people. They would be able to pinpoint the location the person was calling from if they stayed on the call for long enough. Meanwhile, the voice had responded again, but neither had heard what he said. "What?" Stephanie asked. To their surprise, this worked as the person repeated what he had said. As quickly as possible, they made their way over to the tech department while Stephanie tried her best to keep the person on the call. She begged and pleaded, hoping they would leave her and her daughter alone. Her tactics had worked as the person didn't hang up the call, which gave the tech department more than enough time to pinpoint their location. Ben complimented her excellent work, wrote down the place, and went on his way. This day had taken an unexpected turn, but he was ready to finish it. Ben was the first one to arrive and scanned the surroundings. It was a big warehouse at the harbor. He was the officer in charge, so the backup asked him for their orders when they arrived. Moments later, the police force had set up a perimeter, covering every possible exit route out of the building. When everyone was ready, Ben took the lead and approached the building. He silently checked the doors and made his way around. When he was almost finished with his round, he saw a window he could access via a container. He climbed on top of it and peeked inside, curious about what he might see. The building was filled with big wooden crates that were shipped in containers. A group of 7 men stood around an open crate in the middle. Inside was a coffin, which they had opened and were stuffing inside. So that's what they used the coffin for. They were smuggling things out of the country. Having seen enough, Ben notified the police force and got everyone ready. On his count, they entered the warehouse and surprised the criminals inside. It didn't take long for them to surrender and get arrested. It all went over quickly and without a problem until Ben saw movement in the back. There weren't 7 of them, but 8. One of them had been in the back, and once the criminal had heard the police, he had hidden and waited for the right moment to run. The criminal ran through the back door, and Ben immediately went into pursuit, blaming himself for not seeing him. When Ben ran through the door, he was greeted by his colleagues who had been standing guard at the back door. They laughed at him while arresting the final criminal, congratulating him for this successful operation. All 8 men were arrested and prosecuted for smuggling illegal goods and threatening people into smuggling for them. The criminals had been taken back to the station, and together with the testimony of Stephanie and the evidence they found at the warehouse, Ben was sure they would be put away for a very long time. After it was all over, he stayed in touch with Stephanie, who tried to get her life back. She had thanked him more times than he could remember, and he was happy he was able to help them, but he couldn't help but notice she was still struggling. As it turned out, Stephanie struggled with anxiety ever since she was threatened, even though the people had been caught. Ben felt bad for her, but understood it had greatly affected her mental health. He offered his support, and together, they would visit a therapist who helped her get back to her old self. After a while, she fully recovered, and Stephanie could fully enjoy her life again with her daughter. Months later, Ben was awarded a medal for quickly capturing a criminal organization and aiding a citizen in distress. Someone had written a letter to the mayor explaining why he deserved a medal. According to Stephanie, it was the perfect way of thanking him for all he had done for her.